Well, thanks everybody that is listening to the webinar, which is sponsored by Horses Say and the Adelaide and Mount Lofty Ranges, the NRM. This time we're going to talk about birds, bees and bugs around your stables and yards and in your gardens as well. A little bit background for those that are not familiar. So Mariette Berg, I am company called MBA Equine Services and provide various services in equine nutrition, environmental consulting, and I have a background in animal and equine science. And if you can see one of the pictures there is one of my feeding trials where I looked at the oral sensory behavior of horses, so looking at taste and smell and how important that is in making diet choices. So that was at the University of Queensland. And I try to integrate both the science component of my studies as well as my passion for pasture management and large landscape design, so farmscaping. And from that, I got into various principles and various farming strategies, including permaculture. So I integrate permaculture, holistic management, and behave, which is using animal behavior or understanding grazing behavior and integrating that into pasture management. So both are on a website. So if you go to MBA Equine Services or Equine Permaculture, there's a lot of information and a lot of articles as well on various topics from nutrition to soil. So check that out. At the end, I'll have a few links. So what we're going to talk about today is so looking at birds, bees, and wildlife around our stables and yards. So I'm going to look a little bit at good bugs versus kind of beneficial and beneficial versus harmful species, looking a bit into talking a bit about pest control around stables, but the main focus will be on how can we actually support the good bugs and bees and birds and wildlife that are so important to the Australian environment and for our conservation and pollination of different plants that we have. And the focus would be indeed on like design and landscape business considerations in and around kind of your stable and yard area. So the first friend or foe, so having a look at harmful versus beneficial, I would say animals and insects. So as you can see here on the slide, I've put the statement there, choose your pest species, and obviously this list may not be complete. Some of these are obviously introduced species that are posing a threat to our native wildlife and native insects, and we have also our native species that may pose a problem to ourselves or to our horses. So obviously some of our native spiders and snakes can pose obviously a hazard to both us and to the horses around the stable. So those may be things that we have to control. And I'll get back to some of those strategies as well. But there's also a lot of good bugs and animals that we want to have, that we want to support, and that we want to have in our gardens, in our veggie gardens, that we want to have around our stables and yards, and it's kind of the types of species that you may need to look into. And again, this list is not complete, and just doing a Google search on beneficial bugs or looking at wildlife for, around your area, your state, you will find that there's a lot of information out there, and you can have a look at what specific species you may want to, like what potential species you may encounter or could have in your gardens or around your tree laneways or your vegetation that you have around the yards. And obviously, one of the hot topics, I would say, within conservation and within organizations such as NRM and land care is obviously bees. So particular our native bees. So I put up here a really beautiful poster of native bees of South Australia. There are posters as well, and there's a lot of these for each state. So if you're from another state and you're listening in, I highly recommend that you do a Google search and looking into native bees of your region. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of bees on there, and we have over 1,700 species of native bees in Australia, and they play an important role in pollinating native plants in Australia. And some of while we have the European honeybee, the introduced species as well, which is obviously a major species in our production of honey, and that's why they also would fall under agriculture. We see that some of these species, these native species, only can pollinate some of our native plants, where the European bees won't be able to do that. And that's because of how, of these bees visiting these type of flowering plants. So again, if you're really interested in this specific topic, I'll provide a few links later on, but again, there's a wealth of information on the internet, particular on native bees, and there's a lot of people, obviously there's entomologists that provide some information, and universities and institutions, but there are actually a lot of people that have it as a hobby, and they document quite a lot about what they've planted and what attracted certain type of bees. So I highly recommend that you look into it. And also, as you can see, there are a lot of beautiful, colorful bee species that we have. So it's definitely worthwhile looking into it. And later I'll give also some information on what links you can look at to certain institutions such as CSIRO as well. Well, it's not only that our bees, but there are a lot of good beneficial bugs. I probably won't have time to go all through them, and it'd probably be quite boring. As I said, I highly recommend that you do a little bit your own research and look into your gardens and see what is already there. And if you have trouble with identifying it, you can actually, if you can catch them, or you can photograph them, or you can find a picture on the internet, then you can always contact Landcare, or like your NRMs, or sometimes also universities, to find out what kind of species you're dealing with and if those are beneficial or not. But for instance, if we take a very loved bug by adults as well as by children, is for instance our ladybug. And if you then look at, well, why are they so beneficial, it's particular in the way they predate on certain types of smaller bugs or insects that actually do harm to the plant. So for instance, your aphids are little organisms that actually they're kind of like a little green little bug. They attach to the plant and they suck out the sap of the plant, and similar to some of your mites and your fleas. And obviously that will damage the plant, so they suck the sap out, or they eat the leaves. And so these animals, so the beneficial bugs, typically predate on some of these smaller level insects. So ladybugs can consume more than 500 aphids during their lifetime, and there are about 500 species native to Australia. However, you have to be very cautious of this one species that is called the 28-spotted ladybug, which is what we call a trader, because it actually eats leaves, and it is like an orange color, and has considered these spots in a nice lineup, and I highly recommend that you have a look at at some of your plants to see what type of, if you have ladybugs, that you have a look at which ones. Again, there's many species, and some of them are as beautiful and colorful as, you know, the common one that you see in this picture. And I put a link there if you are interested to know about more about ladybugs. They are very very beneficial in our gardens, in veggie gardens, and in also in our native wildflowers and bushes. And the site is from CSIRO, so it's called ento.csiro.au. And if you go to that site, you will find that there's a lot of information about a lot of other bug species that this institution is studying. But they have a special page about ladybugs. So if you want to know a lot about ladybugs, that is a good place to start. And obviously the internet again as well. Interestingly, obviously, is, well, how do we attract these beneficial bugs? So bees, ladybugs, butterflies, because they obviously play a very important role in either predating, but also obviously in pollinating our plants. So natives as well as non-natives, depending on what is around your garden. But also they play a big role in the bigger scale of agriculture and conservation. So going back to before we kind of step into kind of our looking into planting and design suggestions, I think that I just wanted to highlight some of the pest control around stables, because also avoiding harmful insects and animals is probably quite high on the list of horse owners. And I think when we think about bugs and insects and wildlife, I think there is a tendency to keep them out as much as possible in our stables, and we're pretty happy to have them in the laneways or a bit further away. And obviously, depending on the type of building, the design, and how old the stable is, and also the way you keep your stable and feeding rooms, you may find that you have much more of a problem with one species than others, such as mice and rats, or somehow you're attracting a lot of ants or things that are kind of dominating. So one of the things to consider is to obviously to kind of repel them or to be able to avoid them is obviously thinking about design, thinking about the material that you have directly around the stable block. So having, you know, stacked up wood very close by, that may attract obviously snakes. Obviously we want to encourage native animals, but it can be a hazard to you and your horse. So you may want to keep that into your laneways, in your forested areas. So thinking about, for instance, having a paved area or a graveled area, a ring around your stables, also for, you know, flat surface for horses to walk on. Keeping it tidy and clean is important. Having horse feed and supplements in tubs and bins. This all sounds very, you know, obvious and very like a common practice. You may have to consider, as I said, your landscape and storage of equipment around the stable. So, you know, like spiders are attracted to, you know, if you're not using your equipment, you will find a lot of cobwebs or spiders housing in turned over buckets and things like that. So you obviously need to always have caution, especially when it's warming up. So around your summer months or going into your summer months, where animals may, you know, come out a little bit more, especially insects and reptiles. They don't have thermoregulation like mammals. They obviously use the sun to warm up. So obviously they like to be in warmer spots. So having a paved area or a gravel area, not with a lot of vegetation around it, can help you with just having a good overview of what, you know, what may come in and may come around. You may have to consider some baiting or chemical control, particularly, for instance, if you're dealing with wood and termites. Have a chat with, if you're a bit worried about that, using chemicals around stables and around animals. It's very important that you do some research, that you get the right information, and also if there's any specific less harmful or more natural biological ways to control some of the pests. So again, you may want to also talk with pest companies. Obviously, they are often based on a more of a chemical-based control or baiting control, but they are also moving to, you know, offering services of more natural biological ways. They have to also keep in mind the legislation or like the protection of certain animals. So if it's a native animal, they cannot, you know, remove that. So there's different ways of or eradicate it. They can move it, but they can't eradicate it or kill it. So there's certain ways that they have to operate. So I would highly recommend to have a chat with your services as well as these control companies. So, but obviously where possible, there's a lot of information and also a lot of people that are practicing already without even knowing natural pest control. And by looking at types of our design and obviously our plants, we can even promote these beneficial bugs. But just coming back to how you can potentially particular flies and some of your mosquitoes that can pose a problem, obviously, because they can carry, well, flies are obviously a nuisance. Horses get irritated, they start kicking to the bellies. Obviously, some of these flies may lay eggs like bots that can cause a problem and digestive problems. So we'll have to think about again, around your yard. Maybe you want to have your compost and you want to probably compost your manure. You want to clean up your manure, so have your pile away from the stable area and your areas where you're, you know, obviously working a lot with the horses. You want to think about obviously physical barrier rugs and masks. There's a lot of do-it-yourself home remedies like your herbs, your spices, oils and soaps that you can use either on the horse or obviously around your stable area. You can think about making, you know, you can think about fly traps. Things like that can help you with some of your, you know, pest related problems. But when it comes to looking at how else we can target it is by thinking about predators, about attracting good bugs, and thinking about landscaping solutions such as your having gardens around your stables and yards, your laneways, and thinking even about implementing your rain gardens or your herb gardens. And it may even be that your house and your stable are quite close together, and so you may already have a garden housing pretty much your yards and then your stable. So utilizing that those kind of spaces can be also very helpful, and thinking about pots and baskets and planter boxes are a really good idea as well if you don't if you want to keep a very clean kind of look, or you want to ensure that you don't have a lot of grass, you know, or a lot of maintenance around stables. So there's a lot of options that you can do. Why is it important that we should have either in planter boxes or gardens around our house, around our stables and yards, is to provide what we call an insectary. So an insectary is a group of plants that provide a protective niche for your natural predators, and it can provide shelter. It provides a supply of your pollen and your nectar, which are obviously important food. So one is for carbohydrate, the other one for protein, and also a water source and a range of other you know, like beneficial habitats, so to attract your, you know, like your insect species. So that's where the SNAP stands for. So shelter, nectar, alternative source or prey for keeping a beneficial population. So if it's you know, if it's running out, and pollen. So those are very important. And here on the slide, you can see some of the important wildflowers that you may be already having in your gardens or already around your property, such as your obviously acacias. They are really good flowering shrub for also pollen, high in pollen. Your kangaroo paw, you have your wild irises, and obviously you have your bottle brushes and things like that that attracts. If you're also interested in attracting birds and you're more in tropical, obviously Gervillia is a really good one as well. So there's a lot of plants out there that we can use, and the main selection is that it needs to have flowers. It needs to be attractive. It needs to either provide nectar, pollen, or shelter. Obviously, I talked about veggie gardens. A lot of these insects, particularly also the imported species such as your European honeybee, but also butterflies, they are very attracted to a lot of plants that you have in your veggie garden, such as your, for instance, your dill, broccoli flowers, and then you have kind of your mint family, as well as your lavender that attracts a lot of these as well as natives, but definitely a lot of butterflies and honeybees are attracted to these. So having a bit of a combination of having natives as well as your veggie patch in your area around your stable or around your house or in stable area can be very beneficial. Obviously food supply, so having your own veggies can be very handy, and obviously your herbs. And especially considering that we have been dealing with the drought situation and where we've been struggling obviously with our water supplies, it can also reduce the habitat for a lot of of our native insects, and obviously also for the imported honeybee for honey production. And so having consideration to create these oases is very important, and that's where we can look at some of the designs and looking at some of our runoff waters such as our rain gardens to create these kind of little oases, so that we can, first of all, it helps with our aesthetics, but obviously it is a habitat for a lot of animals that are also struggling due to the drought. Obviously, if there's no water and we can't use any water, it will be much harder to keep these oases, but often because these are smaller patches and you will always have some kind of gray water coming from your showers or from your dishes, you can always catch that, or from your horses. So for instance, if you hose your horse very shortly, all that water can be captured to supplement these little oases. You may not save your grass, that's not really that like your lawn, but kind of these areas could be very, very beneficial for keeping the wildlife supplied as well, with greenery and obviously water. So having a look a bit about the design. So what can you do? Again, it is a bit of a personal preference, and also your area, what kind of problems you're dealing with. Do you have a lot of runoff? Are you having a lot of problems with certain pest species? You may want to have, as I said, more of a paved area directly around your stable and not have too much wood or plants directly onto the building, but a little bit away, so you can have like a path around it. And then from outside that, so say from a meter or 1.5 meters or even further, start doing something with vegetation, with either you're creating garden, such as here in the left corner, you can see that they've created a little bit of a rain garden. So any runoff of the washing bay goes into this little patch. You can also create, as I said, with planter boxes, some areas outside the stables that can also look very aesthetically pleasing, especially if you have like a facility where you have a lot of people coming and going and you need a parking space. You may have to be kind of smart with your space, and planter boxes can be very handy. As I said, rain gardens, so actually having a little bit of a way, and then having any of your runoff. So if you're not catching any of the water, so it's obviously your washing bay, but it could even be that you have shelter area that you don't have on a rain tank as yet, or you're not, or you want to use that water for gardens. Then you could, for instance, make these rain gardens where you allow the rain to kind of absorb and sit, and that it then sinks slowly into your deeper layers. So again, here on the picture you can see it having it beside some of your yards, so any runoff of your yards is then captured in these rain gardens. And again, these rain gardens are little oases that you can then plant natives as well to attract certain birds, of certain bees and bees, butterflies, and other bugs. So it can then work, as has multiple functions. So it is dealing with some runoff, trying to absorb some of that runoff, trying to avoid having muddy pools, and at the same time have some greenery and create a habitat for insects and other little lizard wildlife, etc. Obviously, you can be very creative with or in and around your stable with plant boxes. Again, you can be as creative as you want with that. You can have your veggies in boxes, in planter pots, and that can help you with attracting some of your insects as well. Again, it's a little bit dependent if you want to have that close to your stables or a little bit away. But yeah, there's a lot of, again, if you look on the internet of what people come up with herb gardens and wildflowers or flower gardens for insects, you find a lot of designs and a lot of options that may be suited for your stable and yard area. What is obviously of very interest, and you may have heard of these, are these insect hotels. So these are particular, have been very popular in Europe, and particularly in our forest area. So you would even, when you walk into the forests, you would find these kind of built by state forestry, and they provide also education, and a lot of schools and kids are doing a lot with these kind of hands-on kind of building insect hotels for their gardens. And the benefit of these are obviously that you're creating a habitat for insects, and that it helps control pests. Obviously, you want to attract these beneficial bugs. It can help with stimulating biodiversity, and then obviously more resilience dealing with pests, and a more balanced ecosystem. And as I said, it's a really good opportunity for educating children and how to balance ecosystems. It's a really fun one to do, particularly because a lot of these bugs, like the ladybugs, speaks a lot to children, obviously. However, there is a lot of information if you really go into the entomologist's advice about what works and what doesn't work. It's a bit of a trial and error, but there's quite a lot of information out there on this, a bit of science about what which designs are more suited for certain types of insect, which are probably not so suited. So for instance, having more of a design that is a little bit higher, a little bit more into the garden, which means that you don't have any large predators underneath, which can eat some of these beneficial bugs, is sometimes the way to go. Versus, for instance, here you can see it's a great, obviously, use of our pellet system, but it may actually attract quite large predators, such as that can then eat out or compete with some of your, the bugs that you particular want. So, for instance, or insects that you want, such as your native bees or your honeybees. So these are things to consider, and there's a lot of information out there. So for instance, it appears that the insect hotels are pretty successful for bees, moths, some of your ground beetles, spiders, worms, and some of your larvae and other, or kind of more microorganisms such as fungi and bacteria. But there's specific designs such as your open tube systems that will attract some of your bees. Then you have kind of like these crevices that will attract as well more of your native bees, so they like some little cracks and hollows. Moths, they like the smaller holes as well as these tubes. And so for each of these kind of insects, there is kind of a particular niche that you will have to consider. And so when you're looking into designing some of these insect hotels, you will have to kind of consider the size, the length, and there's a lot of information and a lot of workshops as well on making one of these hotels for these specific animals. For butterflies, there is they typically recommend these kind of crevices, like it's like a mailbox kind of look, where they can go into the box, but it appears that not always butterflies seem to use these because they're not really overwintering. And so some have had success with them and others don't. So it's kind of a little bit of a trial and error in your area if some of your butterflies may use them. It seems that for butterflies, the best thing you can do is just having a lot of flowers and in full sun. So they do like the heat. So having specific flowers that attract butterflies. So again, by doing a search on the internet, you can find a lot of information about which natives, as well as some of your veggie patch or herbs you can and flowers you can in your garden can plant to attract specific butterflies if you're very interested in attracting those type of insects. But it's all about being creative. So again, there's a lot of designs out there. There's also boxes, commercial boxes that you already can buy, but it's important to kind of look at what at the holes, the tube system, and the crevices that it creates for these specific insects. Obviously, besides insects, there's obviously birds and wildlife that will be already around your stables that we would like to encourage, particularly our native birds and wildlife. However, when we went to the first slide, choose your pest, there may be put in brackets pest species, so there may be even birds that are native to us but may cause a problem in our stables, such as our swallow. It can cause obviously fire hazards if it's on power plugs and on leads and things like that, and you may have to remove these nests, and you may have to think about creating some of these specific areas where they could nest. And then again, it's quite a difficult situation if they are really attracted to your barn, and also removing them. But again, there are some organizations that can give you quite a bit of information about what to do. So if that is a specific problem for you, just check that out again. But where possible, we can create outside the stable quite a lot of alternatives, using obviously your nest boxes to encourage particular birds. So it's important that we encourage that for obviously similar reasons of biodiversity, resilience of the environment, having a balanced ecosystem. They are also predators of insects and small animals. So again, they can also help with pollination. So obviously the nectar eaters, and that attract also that are attracting or catching pollen, they can help with that as well. And you have to consider also your stable design and your trees and vegetation around those areas to kind of kind of either avoid certain species coming in, or trying to set up areas where you can obviously set up some of your plant boxes. Obviously, when it comes to some of these tree, kind of mimicking these tree hollows, you want to obviously have these nesting boxes a little bit elevated. You want to have them ideally on a tree, or in an area where it's at the right height, in the right habitat for those specific animals. So tree hollows particular are important because animals like sugar gliders, kookaburras, so it is here, your glass, cockatoos, possum, they all nest and roosting in those and using them for shelter. And it's important that we consider these habitats, because there's been quite a major loss of these due to obviously development, logging, and obviously recently there's obviously the bushfires have caused obviously also a lot of these trees to be burned down or fallen over. So I think it's a really, really important time if you're around those areas that have been struck, there's been large habitat loss, to contribute to, to provide around your property alternatives for these animals to nest in or roost in. Another problem is obviously fragmentation of our habitat, having all these patches, so it's more difficult for animals to move around, so this is one of the ways you can contribute. There's a lot of, again, information of a lot of organizations, including the NRM and also states, provide a lot of information. You have for instance, wires, a lot of animal conservation and rescue organizations provide specific information about nesting boxes, creative ideas, how to make them. Again, there are also commercial available boxes, and for each species there is a specific design that is more successful than the other. And I think that is similar to the insect hotel. You have to do a little bit of research, and again, it could be a really good activity to do with kids, or if you have time now to obviously make them from wood. But there's different materials, as you can see here is one of those ones that you can buy for hanging plants, and you just put two on top together, and you put a little bit of chain around it, and provide a bit of bedding, and there you go, you've got a possum house. So I don't think it has to be, per se a commercially made one. I think there's a lot of do-it-yourself options out there, but it's very important to get a little bit of information about, some of the dimensions, the darkness, high up, low, and those, the size of the entrance and things like that are very important for each specific species. So for some resources, to get some more ideas and also to more information, I've put a few tree sites here. There's obviously a lot more, but again, you want to kind of look at some of your organizations or sites that are supported by certain organizations that are scientific based, or provide some information that is then linked either to some like organizations that support or do studies on, like entomologists that provide input into and wildlife, obviously wildlife organizations that have hands-on experience with these types of this kind of design of boxes, or these for instance hotels. So one of them is the goodbugs.org.au. Again, a nice library of some of the bugs that we would consider beneficial here, and that are common here, or that you can find here in Australia. as I said previously, the Cyro site, the ento.cyro site, is also a really good resource for some of your bug and insects and native bees. You have for South Australia environment.sa.gov.au, so a government site which has a lot of information also on nesting boxes, how to build a native bee hotel. And then obviously the NRM, Adelaide Mount Lofty Ranges, have also some links to animals and wildlife and insects, and they also will have upcoming workshops or webinars that specifically focus on some of your native bees and how to make these hotels. So thank you for listening.